Today we're going to talk with functional medicine practitioner, podcaster, and author, Dr. Lara Salyer, about how we can use both flow science and functional medicine to help move us beyond a state of burnout, stress, grief, and inflammation, and into one of energy, creativity, and flow. So listen in for some science and steps toward a beautiful state of flow and functional health. From Dr. Lara Salyer. Let's first travel back to 2016 when you noticed, I'm burnt out. Talk about that and I guess the 15 years or whatever leading up to it.
Yeah, well, in a nutshell, I think as a young, high-achieving, interested person that was fascinated with anatomy, physiology, healing, medicine, I naturally went to medical school like many of my friends. And we were promised it gets better. We were promised that each year you will find more joy. And each year you will be less and less stressed with the, finals or tests or boards. And you'd have more autonomy. And I imagined myself as this country doctor who would be seeing her patients and just loving every day. And after 15 years of grinding, I found that, yes, I enjoyed my patients and there were many parts of my job that I enjoyed, but the landscape of medicine had changed slowly and very insidiously underfoot, so subtly that I barely could recognize the place that I had so longed for and worked hard to join, had become unrecognizable with the cold shoulder that medicine, I think, gives both patient and physician. Everything is very measured and mandatory, and there's a lot of, cookie cutter metrics applied. And it just felt like I couldn't express myself and bring to that exam room the healing modalities that I had wanted. So back in 2016, after a long day where I felt like I'd made incredible efforts and connections, I remember talking with a widow who had just left her husband. I remember finally breaking through to a patient who was having difficulty understanding why diabetes was important. I was sewing up a laceration. I was putting an IUD in for women's health. I was doing all of the wonderful things I loved. But in the middle of it, I had mandatory meetings and I was told that my mammogram percentages and tetanus shots weren't up to par. And yet all my patients loved me. I had a really good patient satisfaction score. I felt like the measurements weren't connecting to how I viewed a real physician and their worthiness should be measured. And it was a leap year day. It was freezing cold. And I had my wits end when I received an email saying yet another change to the mandatory dress code and that the art in the walls would be taken down and replaced with branded art. And it felt more and more sterile. And as I was walking to my car, the snow was flurrying around my face and I was frustrated. My teeth were chattering. I work in Wisconsin, so we chatter our teeth a lot in the winter because it's freezing. And I went to my car and my nurse runs after me. And she's running in the snow and she didn't even have her coat on. And she said, Dr. Salyer, I just have one more thing I need to ask you about. There's a lab result that's urgent. And of course, I will listen. Let's talk about this. And I answered her quick question. And she looked at my face and she said, are you okay? And I said, no, I'm really not. And as a matter of fact, it's a leap year right now. And in 4 years, I'm not going to be here. I can't do this anymore. And she didn't quite understand how to unpack that phrase. That could mean a lot of different things, but I reassured her that I'm fine. This was not what I had signed up for. So that began my soul searching of what would be my next step.
Yeah, and there was something going on in your body, in your brain that you didn't like, that didn't feel you. On the outside, I guess you were being productive, you were getting things done, maybe making money, looking good or whatever. But yeah, what is going on in the body of someone who's burnt out? And yeah, it might be individual, I don't know, but yeah, maybe you could unwrap that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, let's talk about diagnosing burnout is 3 characteristics. You have a feeling of depersonalization where you don't see yourself. You're not personally feeling like you see yourself in that career. There's not elements of you in there anymore. You feel like a robot. You have low perceived achievement. That's the second characteristic, where you don't see how you're making a difference. You're not moving forward in the ways that feel measurable and meaningful to you. And then the final metric is emotional exhaustion. You're running on fumes. You don't feel like you have these emotional awareness or events that feel like you're, living life. And I definitely checked all three boxes. And in burnout, it has the same characteristic brainwave pattern as grief. So if we put all of our healthcare workers' brains in a functional MRI, over 63% of them would be grieving. They would have the signature brainwave pattern that looks just like burnout. And if you think about losing somebody, whether it's a spouse, a friend, a family member, or even losing like a job, a divorce, it could be any kind of loss. That's huge. That's grief. And imagine going to work like that every day. You can bet we'll make mistakes. You bet that these physicians and nurse practitioners that are burned out are having lapses of memory and not able to be that best self to show up for that patient. And yet they try day after day. And also police officers, frontline workers. I mean, burnout is every industry. So what's happening in your body is almost a slowing down of physiology. You might notice, you're feeling distracted. You might have weight gain. You might have, effects of cortisol, either high cortisol or depletion. And all of these things can come together for this cocktail of misery. And the hardest part of burnout, I think, in my, years of working with other practitioners and helping them through burnout, is the hardest part is knowing that you're burned out, because we don't want to admit that. We're pretty hardy. We're pretty gritty. It takes a lot to finish medical school. It takes a lot to get all the way here. And suddenly you look back and realize, wow, I don't feel very good. It's like being at the top of Mount Everest and going, how am I going to get back down? There's no way. And you suddenly feel ashamed. You feel silly because your colleagues certainly don't want to talk about it, because they want to tell you, just come on, you're fine, just move on. Especially if you're a woman, when you have to take a break for a baby, you're often told you've got to get back to it within 4 to 6 weeks. People ask how your vacation was. It's a very different environment. And so this is not the culture that is easy to admit that you're burned out. And in fact, I did admit it, and my administration didn't do anything. They just said, okay, and because there's no solutions. But the thing is, they didn't know what I know now after going through years of training with the Flow Research Collective and functional medicine. There are things you can do if you're starting to feel burnout, because the secret is burnout is not curable. It's something to expect in life. I think burnout happens with everything. It's the idea that you recognize it and know the steps to take yourselves away or through burnout in a safe and balanced way. And then we can all feel better.
Yeah. So some of the solutions are, through this functional medicine path, maybe eating certain foods or removing certain toxins or whatever. I'll let you talk about it. And then there's another kind of interrelated path that you learned through the Flow Research Collective, which might be engaging in certain actions that produce flow, understanding the neuroscience of it or whatever. Yeah, these are some things I'd like to talk about. What should we talk about first, the functional medicine or the flow?
Oh, let's talk about flow, because see, when you learn about burnout, so as and I'd like to make a bridge for your listeners. They're probably thinking, okay, wait, you left me at leap year day in 2016 in the snow, and now you're doing this. Tell me about that. And actually, the following weeks, I had put in a resignation letter. I had started to do some Google searches on what I could use my skills for. I had searches for things like cake decorating or, whatever, consulting work. I actually thought I was going to leave medicine. And in one last ditch effort, I was starting to stumble upon more literature research about stress and cortisol and how that impacts the body. And I was fascinated with that. And I happened upon a search for functional medicine conferences. I had never heard the term. I'm an osteopathic physician by trade, a very holistic minded physician. And I learned how to manipulate, with my hands to help with adjustments, very similar to chiropractic care. And so that intrigued me. I didn't know what functional medicine was. And they promised organic food and yoga. So I went on this last conference labeling it my last conference of medicine, thinking I'm just going for vacation. And that was my attitude. I walked in there, and I remember I walked in thinking, okay, I'm here for 5 days. This will be a nice way to end cap my career in medicine. I'll learn a little bit and then I'll leave. And I fell in love. I fell in love back with medicine, because functional medicine, they like to say, they talk about a root cause. I think that's almost too simplistic, but what it does is they go deeper than just a pill for an ill. They go into, why are you having burnout? Why is your cortisol imbalanced? What is causing inflammation in your body? And at the simplest terms, functional medicine is all about inflammation. It's all about what the drivers are, what the triggers are, what can you remove and what can you introduce, what can you rebalance in your system. So it's a really holistic viewpoint, and was something that inspired me. So I continued on and created my own practice here, and have been practicing ever since with functional medicine, and henceforth helping practitioners. Because, see, if you think about burnout, kids are not burned out. Imagine yourself as an 8-year-old. And when your teacher said it's free time and you get to run outside, the glee you felt as a kid. Kids don't need permission to get into flow. They know exactly what to do. They know how to play that soccer game. They know how to sit at that 3-point line and aim towards the bucket. They know how to play house with their friends, or Lego blocks, video games. All these things are elements of flow. And that is literally the opposite brainwave pattern as burnout and grief. So flow is the only time your brain produces 5 neurochemicals of happiness. So naturally, the antidote of burnout is teaching ourselves again how to reclaim that inner flow, that creative joy, that self-expression in everything we do, but especially in small moments of our life, and giving ourselves permission to measure the 6th vital sign, is what I call it, because we measure vital signs in medicine that keep us alive, but the 6th vital sign is creativity, and that's really what we're here to do, is to be expressive humans and enjoy life on this earth.
Okay, so finding a kind of creative act, maybe it's running or playing the piano or playing basketball, or maybe having a conversation like we're doing right now. Hopefully you can get into flow with that. By doing that, your brain waves are going to change, and then I guess your hormones and everything else is going to change. Maybe you can explain uh, a bit more about the connection between flow and getting out of burnout.
Sure. So yeah, it's not a magic switch, right? But flow actually is a 4-phase cycle. When you get into flow, a lot of us think of those famous artists, Shakespeare, the painters, that were maybe in a cabin in the woods painting or writing, and they got into flow. Or we think of flow and creativity as this magical fairy that you wait for your creative muse to show up and inspire you. But that's actually not what happens. Flow is actually a 4-phase cycle, and it starts with struggle, believe it or not. So it starts with high cortisol. It starts in the prefrontal cortex, in the beta waves, where you're concentrating, and that task may look just slightly out of your reach. So you might be, trying to run a mile faster than you ever have. And so you're thinking, do my skills match up? And so that is one key part of flow, is that your skills almost are perfectly matched to that challenge, but not yet. So it's giving you kind of that carrot at the end of the stick. There's a little bit of struggle. And then the next phase is the release phase. That's the aha epiphany moment, when the alpha brainwaves come out. And that's when you connect the dots. Remember that story of Archimedes, who is the famous mathematician? And he was trying to figure out how to solve the volume of an object, and he was toiling away and in his castle, I guess. And as history books said, he was working hours on end and could not come up with the solution. That's the struggle phase of flow. And he then went for a walk, which is part of a release phase. We'll talk about some release triggers. But it wasn't until he went and took a bath and immersed himself in the tub and saw the displacement of water. And then he shouted, "Eureka, aha, I have it." And that is how he learned and connected the dots to create the end of his equation. That release stage is interesting because it's actually not something you can have happen in your head. Your brain helps you. Like, it's almost like you've been doing all the hard work in that struggle phase, and then you need to take a break. You need to somehow look at something else, go take a walk, you need to look at nature or do some kind of bilateral activity with your hands, drumming, knitting. And then your alpha brainwaves bring forth all the extra thoughts that are in your subconscious to give the solution. And that third phase is flow. So after you've done the struggle, the release, you're into flow, and flow can last anywhere from 5 to 120 minutes. And that's deep with endorphins. You've got amazing ability to lose sense of time. You feel like you're on autopilot. There's a sense of richness where you're immersed in all your senses. So think of things like, surfing on a wave, or again, running. You can get lost in flow in conversation. You forget where you are, and that's part of what flow is. But the last phase is often the most neglected. And the fourth phase is recovery. And that's where you have more of the oxytocin. It's the rest. It is the unplugging. And that's where a lot of us, including me, the high achievers, have a hard time making time for. We love flow because flow is addicting. It's autotelic. It feels great. You feel grandiose. It's a pleasant feeling of being on top of the world, that you've got all the problems figured out because you're in flow and you're productive. You are actually 400% productive, and you find things more meaningful than ever before. So the key to smart use of getting in flow is make sure you recover, which means you plan time to stop. And I often tell people to put a timer on your activity so that you pause and then you take a break, you go for a walk, you doodle, you draw, you might do some meditation or yoga or sauna, something to recover, and then circle back up to the top to struggle again and dip back in. So that's kind of flow in a nutshell, is like a 4-phase cycle. And the way I use it is I prescribe it really to my patients, to the practitioners that I coach and that I mentor, to help them understand how they can build those flow blocks in their day to make their day more lively and self-expressive and efficient.
So there are these 4 phases of flow, which is very helpful to understand, because then I guess the entry, I wanted to ask about how to enter flow, sort of these flow triggers, but it sounds like there might be different kinds of triggers depending on which stage you're at, to maybe trigger the release or to enter the struggle or whatever. And then there's also sort of ones that are blocking it or stopping it from happening, things common in modern society. So maybe there's a lot going on in this question, but yeah, talk about whatever's most important there in terms of things that will kind of help you enter it or kind of block you at whatever stage you want to focus on.
Sure. So it is pretty complex because people are complex. So everybody's a little different, right? And I like to explain that the antidote to burnout is, the AHA. We talked about AHA, right? And AHA is another mnemonic that I use, which is anchor, highlight, and activate. So when I'm working with a client or a practitioner or a patient, we talk about anchoring deep into your values. What's important to you, right? What's your why, as Simon Sinek would say. And so whatever activity that is, you're asking, why am I doing this? There's got to be a reason, right? Sometimes it's easy. You're balancing your checkbook so you can know exactly how many coins are in the bank, right? But there's a reason. Why are you doing that? So I could put aside money to afford my next car. Looking at anchoring that activity into the why, highlighting, how will you know you're making meaningful progress, right? So we talk about setting up milestones for yourself in that flow, right? Are you looking to run 2 miles? Are you looking to run a faster 2 miles or just 2 miles? All these different ways you can measure. And then activating that flow is what you're talking about, is getting into that physiology. So yes, there are flow triggers, enhancers. There's also flow blockers or disruptors. So let's talk about flow triggers. The common flow triggers are starting off in a good mood. So we talk about enhancing and leveraging your day for flow is having a good playlist of music you love, right? Gets you in a good mood. It gets the serotonin going. It might even raise a little bit of healthy cortisol if you're moving around, you're dancing. Other flow triggers are looking out into the horizon at nature. Being in nature is a huge flow trigger. Having shared values with your coworkers, having community, that's a big flow trigger. Also, feeling that you're able to have a little bit of risk, like we like to gamify things. So having a little bit of a gamified nature to that task makes it a lot more likely to be triggered into flow. So you can easily do that for common chores. I do it for my teens. If I were to tell them, please put the dishes in the dishwasher, that sounds like a task that could take forever. But when you tell them, can you just take 5 minutes? I'll set a timer, and whatever you get done in 5 minutes, that's all you need to do. Guess what? The dishes are in there in 2 minutes. Like, it's kind of a mind bending thing, right? And so gratitude is another flow trigger. If you constantly practice a gratitude practice where you're reflecting on the things you are grateful for, not I have to go to work, but I get to go to work. Not I have to walk up these stairs, I get to walk up these stairs. There's ways, subtle ways to tap into that power of gratitude so that you can start to leverage these good neurochemicals that will prime your brain to dip into flow easier. The most important that I see is time management, by managing your time and knowing your own cadence. So I'm a morning person. I'm not going to get into flow at 2 in the afternoon or 3 in the afternoon. I won't. So any difficult project that I need a lot of brain power for, I'm going to put it in the morning when I know that I'm awake and that I'm easy to get into flow and enjoy that activity. So these are things that you can pepper in. Now, nobody's going to do this all at once. So what I do with my patients, my practitioners that I'm coaching through Burnout, is I have them do a little inventory over a week. How does your week look? Your Monday is different than Thursday. That's different energy. Are you more energetic on Monday? Maybe not. Maybe you have your weekends are a lot more draining. So you need time to recover. And this is where it is. It takes a while of learning your own time cadence, because then you can stack your flow differently depending on the season, depending on the day. And then we can't forget the flow disruptors, the blockers. Things that will block your flow are things like a fixed mindset, right? Somebody who says it's either or, it's black and white, everything's bad. One thing happens, their whole day's ruined, right? Or they think everything has, there's a problem with everything. They don't have this growth mindset that they can change and adapt, because they think that their personality is static and that's who they are, right? Flow blockers are also things like chronic stress, high cortisol, right? If you're operating with tons of stress, mismanaged cortisol, you're fueling your physiology poorly, you are eating very inflammatory foods, you're involved or drinking a lot of poisons like alcohol, or you're in a toxic environment with lots of chemicals, you work in an industry with solvents, those things are really hard on your body, and your body's doing its job to clear those out. So that's going to take priority. It's going to be a lot harder for you to have your body get into this nice state of flow. Other things are a malalignment of values. If you just don't jive with your boss's corporate values, and you're working in a place that just suddenly doesn't feel like it's upholding the places that you want to go, all of these things can disrupt flow, as well as interruptions. That's the number one thing for disruption. So I have most of my patients and the clients I have is, look at turning off all notifications, really being diligent about time blocking and allowing that freedom, setting alarms so that you can let your mind wander and get absorbed in whatever that task is without the worry that you'll be late for that next appointment. So timers on our phone is the best. That's the only notification I would allow. Everything else has to be silent. And that way you can just let your mind go and then enjoy the ride.
Wow, this is amazing. It seems like what all these sort of flow triggers and blockers and things have in common, from my perspective, is this idea of kind of connection and openness and actually flow. When your blood and everything is flowing properly, when it's opened up and things are connected, that's going to lead to this. When you're looking at nature, when you're connected to each other, when you're like immersed in your experience, when you're connected with your values or this or that. For me, it's like, this might be an oversimplification, but like whenever anything in life sort of kind of widens up and kind of gets this panoramic view in the body, in your vision, whatever,
Yes.
with each other socially, nutritionally, and biologically, it's like, oh, when that's going on, when there is actual flow of whatever air or water or blood or I don't know, vision or whatever, then that other version of flow, this neurochemical thing, also simultaneously occurs. And I don't know, I didn't go through the Flow Research Collective, but I'm like, wow, this is pretty cool stuff.
Well, I think it's cool, but I also think that a lot of people are saying the same thing. And this is where you take it to another level. I would say flow is just a scientific way of talking about spirituality. It's just like your podcast is called, Brain Shaman. And so why is flow called flow? It's probably the word that fits well in neuroscience. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi was the Turkish psychologist that coined the term decades ago, saying, wow, I'm noticing this thing called flow, where a human can say, I was really productive, and they are, and they lose track of time. And wow, what is this little phenomenon? But maybe you talk to somebody else and they might say, well, that is divine, that is spirit, that is source, that is what's moving through you. And so I think it's really neat to see the consciousness in the world, like all kind of coming to similar conclusions with just using different words. And sometimes this framework works really well for those of us that are in science or more left-brained that want to have a structure and strategy, whereas others might just say, oh yeah, I get into flow all the time, I know exactly my triggers, and I get in there every day, and they don't even need to think about it.
Yeah, I enjoy the neuroscience side of it too. I really loved it when I first heard Stephen Kotler explain the sort of the recipe of flow, and like, okay, there's these 5 neurochemicals. It's I'll try my best to remember it. I think it's dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, endorphin, and anandamide. And
yes, you got it.
yay, I get an A or an A minus or A plus, hopefully. But yeah, you were talking about the timing of flow, and there's also sort of timing and sort of cycles of these neurochemicals throughout the day, throughout our life, throughout the season. So, for example, I don't know if you'd want a lot of norepinephrine before you go to sleep, or dopamine even. But you
Correct.
might want some serotonin. So the 5 of these together feel really good because they're
Right.
all rewarding, right? Oh my God, it feels good. But just knowing that some of these are, it's probably more optimal to have certain these neurochemicals at certain times of day or life, or depending on the task we're trying to engage in. You don't want all 5 all the time. So yeah,
Right.
with that in mind, talk more about the timing of all of this.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought that up, because I'm going to actually also be a little bit contrarian, because you're taking the example of norepinephrine.
Yeah.
Norepinephrine is typically a chemical that can arise the feeling of fear in us. Many of us have been familiar with the feeling of norepinephrine when you suddenly look at your calendar and you might think, oh my gosh, I totally missed that important meeting, or you're nearly sideswiped in your car, and that norepinephrine is just pulsing, and it's fear. But most of norepinephrine is actually perception. So the same chemical, norepinephrine, is also present when you're excited. And so that's the funny thing, is they did a study where they had these college students before a final exam. They did measurements of how scared they were in anticipation and the norepinephrine. And then they had them just kind of fake it till they make it and clap together and say, I am so excited. I am so excited. And they could use that same norepinephrine to do really well on their exam. So you can actually change how that chemical is used in your body just by your perception of what you're doing. So next time you're scared, try to think like, okay, why am I scared of public speaking? What about if I make this, I'm excited, and just try to convince yourself. I know it's easier said than done, but it's an interesting thing about neurochemicals. They're only in the synapse for 90 seconds and then they're washed away. So it's a lot about the narrative that you wrap it in. Like, what are your goals for using this neurochemical? And so when you speak about flow throughout the day, yeah, I don't aim to get in flow at night at all. I may try maybe to do some painting or something a little less intense, because you're right, you can sometimes wake yourself up, you can make yourself more stimulated and then have a hard time sleeping. So this is one of those things where you start to know your body and what types of flow activities really are better for you in the day or the night, the winter, the summer. I mean, the possibilities are endless.
Yeah, and you know much more about this than I do, but when you combine these neurochemicals together too, it creates completely different effects too. Say you put dopamine together with serotonin. I think about certain drugs. I know we're not gonna try to promote drugs and things, but like think about like MDMA for example. You're getting dopamine, you're getting norepinephrine, but you're also getting a lot of serotonin, and that creates sort of this empathogenic kind of thing going on. With psilocybin and the other psychedelics, you're getting a lot of serotonin, but of course, you're going to have a lot of dopamine and stuff going on too, but maybe just naturally, or I don't know. I haven't dug too much into it. Yeah, but if you just have one on its own, which I don't know if you ever do, that'll create a completely different effect. So when you have all 5 of these at different weird levels, like, I don't know, maybe it's completely different than our normal vision of this is what dopamine does, this is what norepinephrine does. When you put them all together, it's like a whole different beast. Yeah.
I think we try to be very reductionistic, trying to say, okay, this is what this does. And you're right, it is impossible. Science is actually impossible. It really is. You can't, the minute you're trying to observe a scientific thing, you've already ruined the experiment because you're observing it. That's the principle, right?
Yeah.
You can't really ever measure. So there really isn't a way to say, oh, well, this percentage, if you have 20% dopamine and 40% norepinephrine, you're going to feel this way. Everybody comes with their own story,
Yeah.
their own intergenerational trauma, their own intergenerational narrative, their own spiritual journey, and all of this to say, these experiences it's just one way of describing what you may do to benefit from flow in the brain.
Yeah. I want to make sure we talk about functional medicine too. And later, hopefully, we'll connect it up to this. My vision of functional medicine, yeah, is this root cause type thing. Maybe not going with the pharmaceuticals and these sort of things right from the start, or perhaps ever. Cleaning up our environment, but I'll let you talk about it.
Yeah, it's a long-standing medical philosophy, I would say, started by Dr. Jeffrey Bland and Dr. Mark Hyman over 20 years ago. And it was the idea that we need to look at the whole human being. And I know that as an osteopathic doctor, we say we look at the whole human being. We adjust muscles and tendons and bones and look at systems. But what they do is they expand even further than that. And they look at epigenetics and they look at the soil that the nutrients are grown in. They look at your family history and your grandparents' history, your ancestors. They go really wide and they look at what timeline has happened in your life that has caused inflammatory triggers that can eventually lead to illness, and what habits and lifestyle behaviors do you have that they could adjust to eliminate that potential outcome of a disease, or at least help you feel better now. And most functional practitioners, I mean, the term functional medicine has become a little bit kind of unrestrained and wild west out there because everybody does it a little differently. But in my practice, I lead with natural medicine, herbs, plant medicine, or supplements, vitamins. I look at things, from that holistic, and then I add on pharmaceuticals because there are reasons for certain prescriptions. You're certainly not going to want to suffer if you have diseases that need some prescriptions. So functional medicine is sort of like a nature first and food first solution. And then I use prescriptions as many doctors do afterwards. So there's a heavy, nutritional base. It's a root cause, although I don't like that term root because there's many roots. There's many reasons why we're feeling a certain way or having symptoms. But it's a nice conversation to have with patients because when I have a patient come in, it's complex. It's an hour of a visit where I'm going through all of their history and then I'm putting a plan together to heal their gut, to repair their gut, to start with different anti-inflammatory foods, to, strategically lay out a roadmap of what different testings we're going to do to check things that just aren't checked in insurance medicine, like, cortisol or hormones, or stool testing to check for, dysbiosis and overgrowth. There's so many neat things out there that in the future, I hope it's just called medicine. I really do. I hope it's just eventually going to be called medicine.
With this in mind, looking back at pre 2016, what your environment was like, what your diet was like, other things were like, and then afterwards, things you changed in your diet or your environment or whatever that might have been contributing to your burnout.
Yeah, for sure. So, family history for me, I have ApoE34. And for those that don't know what that is, that's one of the Alzheimer's genes. There's
Yeah.
many different risk stratifications. So, I grew up in a family where every single grandparent crashed and burned starting around age 62. They got Alzheimer's. So, I remember growing up in going to medical school and learning that, oh, they found the gene that causes Alzheimer's. And I said, I will never take that test because I don't want to know. I'm just going to end up old and demented. That was my fate. And then learning about functional medicine and seeing that that is not true, that there is an Alzheimer's gene, but that there are so many other comorbid things that plug into the disease of Alzheimer's, like the diet, heavy metal exposure, hormone therapy, whether you use it or not, all these other neat things that you can do. It felt so empowering. So as I'm learning about this, imagine me, I'm burned out. I'm thinking I'm done with medicine. I have this fatalistic view of the world, like, oh, I'm just going to be turning 62 and then I'm going to be demented. And then I'm listening to this conference going, wait a second, I didn't know that. I didn't know that we could be affected by our oral microbiome. If we have poor dentition or different bacterial strains that we can measure, they can end up seeding into our brain and enhancing all. I didn't know that. And all these ahas were going off in my head. And I thought, wait a second, this is something that we all need to benefit from and take our health more seriously, not perfectionistically, but just more moderately seriously. And so personally, what I did is I started eating gluten-free. Actually, I'd done eating gluten-free before then, but started eating really low inflammatory, higher protein, more vegetables and fruits. And I'd always been, an exerciser. I loved exercising. That was part of how I handled stress. So I continued that. But the biggest thing that I did differently is I stopped using alcohol as a reward. I mean, I live in Wisconsin. We're a huge, drink Wisconsinly is our tagline. And everybody does this when you're an adult, especially if you've suffered through having, growing your career, having kids, like you're kind of stuck at home a lot. And so a lot of parents would have parties and people would drink alcohol. And I never thought of it as a problem because I was responsible. I'd have one or two glasses at dinner, maybe a couple more on the weekend. And so I thought, well, what would happen if I stopped, drinking it? I noticed after learning about all the things in functional medicine, alcohol is a poison. And what it does is it goes in your body and it forces your body to make decisions and say, well, I can't process your old hormones and those toxic chemicals that you've been exposed to. I have to do this poison first. And so it's making your liver take care of the poison and then all these other things back up and you feel sicker and more tired and inflamed. So as an experiment, I just said, well, I'm just going to stop it for a month. And that month turned into several years. And now I've invited it back on occasion for special occasions because I literally know how it dulls my sparkle. It really makes me feel tired and achy and inflamed. And I'm just choosing, I'd rather feel alive and vibrant and in flow. So the only times you'll see me drink is usually if there's some special celebration, a wedding, a graduation. And I know what to do now with functional medicine to buffer and mitigate those effects in my body. So it's not as bad.
This is wild because I didn't intend on making an anti-alcohol podcast or whatever, but this seems to be probably the most recurring theme. Partly of my own will, maybe, but I don't know. It just emerges when you want to talk about brain health and you want to talk about nervous system health. Stop drinking alcohol seems to be one of the things that everyone keeps repeating, and I noticed myself. What would be the anti-alcohol? What do we do when we want to drink? We want to feel good. It might not be immediate, but what's the anti-alcohol?
Oh, that's a great question.
That's not going to kick us in the nuts afterwards.
Right. I love that. So I agree with you. This wasn't even my journey as intended either. I never thought I would be such an anti-alcohol person, and I'm not. I tell people, make the choice, but I'm going to tell you what's happening in your body. And so early on when I was experimenting with not drinking, it would be awkward to go to, parties and I realized, okay, this is interesting. I got to investigate my relationship with alcohol, that I did use it as a crutch for social anxiety. So I got to learn that, oh, this is interesting. I am on the whole, a little bit of a socially anxious person when it comes to groups. So I learned how I could mitigate that differently. And so there's things that I would do, like I would make sure I'm nourished. I'd have caffeine, I might have make sure I have a full stomach so I'm not hangry. Little ways that I take care of my physiology. And I might make sure that I have extra oxytocin, maybe pet my dog, get a couple extra hugs, make sure I honor my own need for introverted time. I like quiet, so I might meditate before I do something that's going to cause a lot more of an energy drain. And guess what? I don't need alcohol. I'm totally fine. The other thing is, for the listeners, wherever you are, plant medicine. There's a lot of use that is beneficial, that I wish our medical society, and it's starting to get more research behind psilocybin and other things. I don't personally use them, but I have a lot of patients that find that is a great bridge for them I would rather them have cannabis or psilocybin than alcohol, because alcohol is a poison. It literally is changing your liver. It is causing your body to work harder. And I don't have much experience with the plant medicine, but I would tell them, if you have that and that's something that you're more comfortable with, I would rather you, small microdose, do things on that spectrum than take shots of whiskey. Because on the whole, that's going to be safer.
Yeah, I tried CBD for the first time a few weeks ago, and I want to say I enjoy it. I don't think I'm going to buy it again, but I was like, okay, let's try this. And it seems to actually produce similar effects as alcohol without all the nasty stuff. And why I don't like it is it does sort of tamp down my brain. I can't think anymore. I can't connect ideas anymore. I can't have conversations. I can't think. I can relax. I can chill. I can sort of enjoy the stuff around me and enjoy the food and
Yes.
people and stuff. I actually become more social, weirdly enough. But there's no hangover from it though, so that's good. So maybe yeah, CBD is a better alternative. Perhaps it could be for some people, but for me, I use it. I have to use it very strategically because like if I used it before this conversation, I would be maybe a good listener, but I'd be like a terrible. I wouldn't be able to talk.
Yeah, so you're hitting it. Yeah, you're totally hitting it, Michael. This is why I don't really use anything, because when you dampen the nervous emotions, you're dampening the positive emotions. You can't just suppress the negative emotions without also suppressing the joy. And that's what I learned in my journey is through, breaking up with alcohol. And I mean, I used to use it as a social lubricant, but like you said, also as like a little reward. I had a hard week. Great. I'm going to have a little bit of a buzz. That's nothing wrong with that. But what happens is that is a false buzz. That is a false euphoria. And the end point of that is feeling tired the next day. So I started thinking, wait a second, now all of my buzz is natural, because why should we dampen? We need to basically re-tap into our own emotional awareness. And so now when I'm feeling nervous, I might say, okay, where is that nervousness sitting in my body? Is that in my neck? Is that in my stomach? What does that need? Does it need a little bit of extra, like, do I need to do an extra mile on the treadmill to get that nerve out? Do I need to meditate? And then conversely, like, feel the joy, feel those emotions. And I think part of us, all of us, have struggled with substances because we don't want to feel emotions. We're scared of them. We don't know what to do with them. They feel weird, and so we use these substances to kind of dismiss and dampen it. When in fact, I think it's better if we just are there, being human and admitting, yeah, I'm socially anxious. Hi, my name is Lara Salyer, but it is what it is. And when we all show up as humans that are self-expressive and creative, I mean, I think the world would be a better place.
Yeah. And for me, the most sustainable, it's not a drug, but whatever you call it, a drug, is doing the creative act that I love. I'm not like painting or nothing like that, but I'll be like just like researching about neuroscience or whatever, and I'll be writing. I write. I do solo podcasts sometimes. That gets that sort of creative. I feel great when I do that, and then that's like a sort of self-feeding process where you get the dopamine, you get the serotonin, all this stuff, and then it stops, and it's sort of this natural cycle that goes on for me. And I'm pushing forward into this life, into this future that I actually am proud of, and I like it, and I'm like, oh, this is me. But when I take these substances, especially alcohol, but even CBD or other cannabis products, or a lot of those things, everything gets shut down. The emotions, the creativity, the thinking, the motivation to study, the ability to learn, a lot of things. But there's benefits. Of course, you can sleep, you can kind of relax, you can, I don't know, reduce anxiety and this and that. But I don't know. I want the whole package. I want to be a human.
Right, right. Absolutely. It sounds like you figured it out.
Is there any way to like kind of tie this functional medicine stuff back to flow? Maybe it's a weird. I like to bridge things together in maybe a hard way sometimes. But have you figured out like a way to do that?
Absolutely. I love connecting that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I follow that three-step method, right? We are all human on this earth. The world is going to have burnout. It is always going to exist. We live in a toxic world. There's a lot of systems that are dismantling and a lot of change happening. And so knowing this, you have elements of burnout in every little way. It could be with a relationship, you're a little burned out. It could be as a mother or as an employee or a boss. There's elements of burnout. So to solve that, remember the aha, right? Anchor into your values. Anchor into, if you can't do that at work, where can you find values showing up in your life that you're excited? You mentioned neuroscience. You're into that. That's anchoring into your values, something that's driving you forward. That can't steer you away. That lifts you up. It lifts you out of that fog of burnout. Then H is highlight. Highlight what would be meaningful progress to you in that. Because we're humans, we like the sticker chart. We love to be a little toddler and saying, "Yep, I did a good job." So, what is progress to you? Maybe if you're listening, you're like, "Someday I want to write a book of short stories." Okay, so write one short story. right? Do something that makes it feel like, hey, I'm headed in that direction. You need to have highlighting those milestones. Flow needs that feedback. And that gives you a longitudinal flow with your life. If you see that you're making progress, that's flowy because you're like, oh, okay, I'm doing it. And the last is activate. And activate means activate your energy because when you're emotionally exhausted, that is not good for flow. So you're activating your physiology, you're diving into functional medicine, you're looking at your food that you're eating, you're choosing low inflammatory choices, you might be looking at your circadian rhythm, and you're fueling your physiology in a way that you're able to show up every day with full sparkle, full glow, and you can say, okay, I'm going to control my time blocks and I'm going to dive in and really activate that flow. And that's what you have is the anchor, highlight, activate, the 3-step flow technique.
Yeah. And it seems like also having the ability to organize your life, your environment, your ideas in the way that feels right to you. I don't think there's a neuroscientific way to explain it, but like for you, for example, you like, organizing these ideas in these sort of infographics. Some people's environments, they want it to have like, I don't know, have a certain chaos to it. There's a certain simplicity to it. Or like my walls are blank. There's your environment. It's getting the ideas out of your head in a certain way. Like maybe you're using Google Docs, maybe you're making this infographics, maybe you're speaking. But like I think getting the ideas out and
Love it.
visually or auditorily in this organized way that like, ooh, that looks beautiful to me. I think when we have that, a lot of this is also reduced. Just getting our information, our ideas organized in what we perceive as a beautiful or good way.
Beautiful, Michael. That is spot on. I love that. I think that's so important to all of us. We all have ideas in our head, whether you want to dump it out in a journal and write it out or a Google document or post-it notes all over your wall but we all deserve to have an environment that supports us and is the vision of our beauty, and everybody's unique. So I love how you put that spin on it. That helps everybody realize that they're all creative human beings with some unique things to say.
One of the problems seems to be also workplaces. I don't want to bash the modern work culture, and I would love to have a job that allows me to kind of freely be in flow and organize my ideas in the way I want and live a healthy life. How can people? This is an impossible question. How can people find or design a way to work that doesn't lead to burnout? Because when we think of burnout, a lot of us connect that to work. Work is causing it, and the way out is like the non-work, the creative stuff, the relaxing, the sleeping. So how do we make money? How do we make money and not be burnt out?
Yeah, so there's many ways that you can work with your employer or culture of coworkers and see about time flexibility is the first place that I would start with. Like, especially with the pandemic, there's a lot of people working from home and they actually are more productive because they can go into their own natural cadence. So this is the problem though, is the workers come and say, "Oh, you're burning me out, boss or job." But they don't have any of their own somatic information or information about their own physiology to be able to come to the table saying, I'm a morning bird, or I work better at 2 p.m., or I like to take a break every hour to walk, or whatever. And so this is why educating and learning about your own flow cycles and cadence can be really helpful. So you can then retroactively ask, permission. Hey, I'm curious. I found that you can say to your employer, I really do well in 90-minute chunks of time and I turn off my notifications. I can dive deep, but then I need about a half an hour to walk outside or to meditate or whatever it is. And if I can do 3 90-minute chunks, and what we're finding is workers are actually more effective when they have less work if they do it in a strategic flow centric way. So sometimes it's about trying to work in your employer's area to see if they'll work with you, to see if you can change your timing or schedules. And if that doesn't work, it might be that you have a different career shift. It's okay to change your mind and look for a different job. I mean, it can just be a job. It doesn't have to be a career. You could just wait tables, but then at night you're deep into flow writing a novel or working on a computer program or something else that lights you up. Sometimes a job doesn't have to be your identity. It can just be a way to, pay your rent.
Yeah, so it sounds like also a gateway into this is we can't just say stop seeking approval, stop trying to obey the rules and just do whatever people want you to do, but like speaking up for yourself and like creating these boundaries around yourself and trying to communicate, say, hey, I don't like this. How about this way? Maybe this isn't how we normally do things. I'm breaking the rules here. Maybe I'm being mean. I'm breaking up with people, friendships or jobs or whatever, but being able to like not be scared to voice your whatever's going on inside of yourself. And yeah, things might not work out how the way you want, but if you just are always like, yes, 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 sir, and you just follow the rules and you never really challenge it, that seems like definitely a recipe into burnout.
Agreed, agreed. And I think that's the problem with a lot of healthcare. We're trained to be very almost self-sacrificial to a fault, and the system is set up to be codependent. We are literally given a portal message where we get hundreds of messages a day and we're expected to answer them within an hour, and we're supposed to see patients at the same time. I mean, it's a recipe for impossibility. Nobody can do this. And that's what's causing a lot of burnout, because we're trained to say yes, we're here to serve and help, and we're not taught how to have boundaries. So a lot of the flow is having boundaries of your energy, and don't think of it as being disappointing to somebody else or being mean or punitive. Think of it as preserving your power and your energy. And the more you put it in that light, and the more you stay in that zone of confidence where you're like, this is to help me be the best I can, that's where a true boundary is healthy, so that you can flourish.
And then you were sort of a normal kind of doctor, with families, a family physician or something like that. And then you created your own kind of customized little practice using functional medicine and flow and stuff. So it seems like you were also kind of doing that. You're like, I'm going to break away from the normal system and make my own thing. This is kind of scary. People may or may not like me. I might lose money. But yeah, just sort of jumping. I guess you got to get uncomfortable. It goes back to the whole first phase of flow. You have to get uncomfortable
Struggle.
in life in order to get into the good stuff.
For sure. But, I would be very amiss if I didn't speak on the privilege I had to do that. I have a spouse, I have somebody that had a stable job, and it was able to, I took out a business loan. So there's a lot of things that aren't available to everybody, right? Everybody's so unique, and so the thing is, this was my solution to help my burnout, but that's not the solution. So I work with practitioners saying, well, what is the needs? There's some basic needs. We need to pay our bills, right? And so looking within some of these options that you have, there's always ways to find flow, but it might look completely different than what you would have expected. And that's the joy of being here, is nothing's permanent. If you don't like it after a year or two, you can stop and you can try something different. And I believe that there is no such thing as a mistake. It's just another growth opportunity to learn from, and more information in your life that you can make better decisions from.
Let's say someone's like super stuck. Like my brother, he's homeless, he's bipolar, and he's like just got no money, I don't know, he's very stuck. Or there's people who are a little bit still pretty stuck, but not as stuck. Say they just living paycheck to paycheck, just like trapped in their job because if they leave, they're literally gonna die. I mean, they can't pay the rent, they can't buy food or something. This is like, these are sort of extremes, but they do exist. More than we want to believe. What are some sort of things they could do to begin to get into this flow? They can't just open up a practice or get a loan from the bank. They probably can't even enter the bank sometimes. Yeah, what do they do? What are some first steps? And we could do this ourselves. Even these are probably things that we can even bring into everyone could bring into their everyday. This probably getting down to the core of it all here. Yeah.
Yeah. So in the last 5 minutes, I can say with certainty that this is something everybody can do right now to get more flow, is to find someone else that is obviously in flow. And really, community is where it's at. So if you are feeling lost and you're feeling like you don't know where you're going, I mean, a lot of people now, especially after the pandemic, and the economy is rocky and housing prices are crazy. So we're feeling very lost and siloed. So now more than ever, we need to find flow. What do little kids do? Remember, I talked at the top of the hour, kids, they don't need permission. They just go and have fun. So go to a park, go start throwing a disc or frisbee, go start riding your bike. What brings you joy? And start finding other people doing that. Is there a coffee shop in your area? Then you see a book club, and can I join? Can I sit with you? What book are you reading? Like, look for community of people, because people is what you need if you're looking to kind of get that compass straight again and you're not quite sure. Listen to other people, find the community of people that you resonate with. And if you're still struggling, look at churches, there's social work, there's all the communities out there. But the hardest part is we kind of feel lost at times. And so when you think of your little kid inside and what they would like to do, start giving yourself permission to explore and have that adventure and find that flow, whether it's inside yourself or with community.
Yeah. be a kid, go out,
Mm.
play and explore with your friends. If people want to connect with you, I know you have a book, you've got a podcast, you've got all kinds of coaching services and etc. I can't even list it all. Where should they go?
I love it. So if you are looking for a very interesting, funny, comedic, but truthful memoir, you can read my book, Right Brain Rescue, One Physician's Journey from Burnout to Bliss. It's available on Amazon. It's on paperback, also on Audible, if you don't mind my Wisconsin accent. And then my website is Dr. Lara Salyer, and you'll find services there if you're a person living in Wisconsin or Illinois. I am licensed in those two states, but I mostly help practitioners like physicians, nurse practitioners, PAs, anybody that's looking to start their own functional medicine practice in a very holistic and self-expressive way that transforms patients' lives without burnout. I can help you set up the business model. I can help coach you through that. But if you're not even in that world and you're just an average practitioner and you're like, hey, I just need some help. I need somebody to coach me through flow and burnout. All those services are on my website at drlarasalyer.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Laura. This is a great way to start my day. I'm going to eat healthy. I'm going to go outside and play. I'll try to engage something creative. Turn off my phone. Definitely turn off my phone notifications. There's a lot you gave us here. Yeah, thank you once again. This is beautiful. See you around.
My pleasure. Have a great day.